Welcome to Storey Recap. Today we are going to recap a mystery thriller movie called Triangle. The movie opens with a teary mother Jess, hugging her frightened son and telling him that he just had a nightmare. Jess is preparing for a boat trip with her autistic son Tommy and her friends, and they will meet at Triangle Harbor that day. The mother is rushing through the house, almost erratically taking out a toy boat from the pool. When Tommy is painting, he spills paint on the floor, so his mother cleans it up. But in the process, her dress gets dirty. Suddenly, the doorbell rings, and when she opens it, there's no one at the door. She gets dressed in new clothes and quickly gets ready to leave the house. Before leaving, she struggles to reassure her anxious son that the floor has been thoroughly cleaned. Then both finally head out from home and make their way to the harbor. Meanwhile, on a boat named Triangle, Greg is waiting for his friends to arrive when Sally and Downey show up first. Sally has also brought along her friend, Heather, to introduce her to Greg. Jess arrives with a man named Victor, but her son Tommy is missing, and Victor notes that something seems off with Jess. Jess hugs Greg, apologizing and explaining that she's just tired but still wants to go on the trip. On the boat, she meets the others, and they prepare to set sail. While cruising, Jess falls asleep in the cabin and dreams about the beach. She wakes up abruptly, but when Heather asks her about the dream, Jess can't recall it. Meanwhile, Greg questions why Jess didn't bring Tommy, and Victor mentions that Jess said Tommy was in school. However, it's Saturday, so that seems unlikely. When Heather and Jess come up from the cabin, Greg asks Jess if everything is all right with Tommy, and Jess reassures him that he's fine. Soon after, the wind suddenly stops, leaving the boat stranded. They realize they're in serious trouble when they spot a dark cloud forming ahead. Greg sends a distress call to the Coast Guard, but despite the dire situation, they report nothing unusual. Suddenly, the radio goes static before picking up the panicked transmission of a woman pleading for help, saying someone is killing everyone. But she is abruptly cut off. As Greg returns from the cabin, the storm closes in on them. Greg instructs everyone to put on life jackets just as the storm hits, plunging everything into chaos. Victor and Greg try to steer the boat to safety, while the others huddle in the cabin. Greg clutches Jess tightly as he navigates, while Downey holds on to Sally. The storm then flips the boat, sweeping Heather into the ocean. As the storm calms down, the remaining group manages to climb onto the overturned boat. Unfortunately, Heather is still missing, and no one knows her whereabouts. Later, they spot an ocean liner, the Aeolus, approaching in the distance. Offering a potential chance for rescue, the group excitedly shouts and signals for help, while Jess observes the ship with some suspicion. When they notice a figure on the bridge of the ship and it finally reaches them, they all board it. Although Jess remains uncertain about the situation, she has no other options and joins the others. Taken out of the sea, they board the ship. However, they don't find anyone on board. Greg thinks they should go to the bridge and talk to the captain. Upon boarding the ship, Jess mentions to Greg that the corridor seems familiar, but Greg notes that most hallways look alike. The others soon discover a framed photo from 1932 showing the very ship they're on. They learn that Aeolus, the ship's name, refers to the Greek god of wind and the father of Sisyphus, a mythological figure condemned to endlessly roll a rock up a hill, only for it to roll back down each day. Their conversation is interrupted by clanking noises, revealing they are not alone. Following the sounds, they find a set of keys that Jess recognizes as her own. She is baffled by their presence and shows the group a photo of her son attached to the keychain, matching the one in her locket. Sally proposes that Heather must have survived, boarded the same liner, and brought the keys with her. In the ship's ballroom, everything is prepared for a party with plenty of food, but there is no one in sight. While Sally calls out for Heather, Jess spots someone fleetingly disappearing from view and tells the others. Victor immediately chases after the figure and searches the empty corridors, while the rest of the group stays in the ballroom. Greg decides to join Victor, with Jess following him, leaving Sally and Downey behind. Jess tries to tell Greg that she keeps experiencing deja vu around every corner, but Greg attributes it to shock. Suddenly, they hear the sound of running water and go to investigate. In a bedroom, they find a message written in blood on a mirror, directing them to the theater. Meanwhile, Victor continues his search for the person Jess saw running down the corridor, guided by the clanking sounds echoing through the liner. Jess is shaken by the blood on the mirror, but Greg brushes it off as a prank by the crew, leading to an argument between them. Jess decides to walk away and returns to the ballroom, only to find Sally and Downey missing and the food now spoiled. Sally and Downey, on their part, discover blood on the floor and follow the trail out of the deck to the theater. Back in the ballroom, Jess hides at the sound of approaching thumps and sees Victor, covered in blood, stumbling into the room. When Jess tries to get answers from him, Victor instead starts to strangle her. Jess fights back and eventually manages to press on a wound at the back of his head to defend herself. Still in shock, Jess snaps out of it at the sound of a shotgun and rushes to see what is happening. At the theater, Sally and Downey are crying over Greg's body, who had just been shot. Sally suddenly jumps at her and accuses her of shooting Greg, so Jess says she was with Victor, but Sally tells her that Greg said she shot him. Downey asks why Jess told them to come to the theater, but she insists that she didn't, right when someone starts shooting from the balcony. Sally and Downey get shot, and Jess flees the theater after she tries to help them. She hides in the kitchen and takes a knife to protect herself from the masked shooter. The shooter peers into the kitchen, but luckily, he doesn't see her and goes away. Jess reaches the lifeboat station in hopes of getting off the liner, but the shooter finds her. When the shooter seems a bit hesitant to pull the trigger, she diverts the weapon away, and Jess slips away from him, landing on the lower floor. The shooter doesn't give up and chases Jess across the upper deck. He then throws his empty shotgun at her as she falls over the fence to the lower deck. Running to the back of the ship, Jess takes an axe she finds on her way and uses it to defend herself. Jess puts up a fight, and she eventually manages to overpower him. Here she realizes that the attacker is a woman, and she says that the only way for Jess to get back home is to kill them all. Jess hits the attacker with the axe, and the mystery person falls overboard into the ocean. As she tries to recollect, she gets distracted by the sound of music coming from one of the nearby cabins, playing on loop on an old record player. After she switches to new music, she hears voices coming from outside. Jess carefully walks over to the deck, only to see Greg, Victor, Downey, Sally, and herself on the flipped sailing boat shouting out for help. She is in shock, wondering what the actual hell is going on right now, and then accidentally plays the music on loop on the old record player again. She also listens to the group that just boarded the sea liner, including herself. Jess decides to stay hidden while witnessing the same events that happened only a while ago, including the conversation. While the others are talking about Sisyphus, Jess peeks and sees her other self look back, almost catching sight of her. Jess sinks to the floor when her keys drop from her pocket. This is when the group hears the sound of clanking, so she runs away. Later on, she can hear that the group is looking for Heather, and she realizes that she was the person they were after the entire time. The new Jess looks back and spots her from the mirror, while Victor goes chasing after her. The original Jess runs back to the deck and sees Downey's body in the water, feasted upon by seagulls. Just then, Victor finds her on the deck, surprised that she got there so fast since he just left the rest of the group in the ballroom. Jess tries to be honest and explain to Victor that something strange is happening on the ship, telling him that her copy is downstairs with the group. She tries to explain that everyone's bodies are all over the ship and that they were all here before. However, Victor doesn't buy it, telling Jess that he found Greg dead and thinks that she was the one who did it. They get into an argument, and Victor accidentally impales himself on a protruding hook. Later, Jess returns to the bedroom where she finds a message in blood on the mirror. She notices that the place is in a worse state than before, with dead bodies scattered around. A gunshot is heard in the background, making Jess realize that the shooter just killed Sally and Downey. She rushes to the deck with the gun she took from a dead body, determined to stop the masked shooter from killing everyone. But by the time she gets there, her other self has already gotten rid of her attacker, so Jess puts the shotgun in her other self's hand and silently encourages her to kill everyone, just like the other version did to her earlier. However, she only scares them and the cycle restarts. Jess doesn't realize it until her doppelganger throws the shotgun at her, causing her to fall to the lower deck. When the other Jess starts running after her, she hides below the stairs, which makes her realize she was the one being chased all along. The story unfolds the same way as before, except this time, the attacker gets the upper hand and takes down her doppelganger. Jess goes back to the lower deck, but the same events unfold when she sees another group of her friends board the ship. She overhears them repeating the same conversation about Sisyphus, just like she did the last time. The original Jess gets out of the ship's cargo hold just to see dozens of dead Sallys, confirming that the loop has been going on for a long time. She tries to do things differently this time, eventually resorting to killing the new Jess when she pushes the bodies of the doppelganger overboard, only to discover that they had all washed up before, hinting that she did this several times already. After all the gruesome events, she breaks down and goes through all the different possibilities. Desperate to end the loop, Jess seizes the pistol and heads to the upper deck, determined to kill everyone to break free from the loop. She starts by killing Victor, followed by Sally, Downey, and Greg. At the ship's bow, she is cornered by Sally, who then falls overboard. When the new group boards the ship, Jess collapses in the fetal position at the stern, devastated by the number of people she has killed to end the cycle. As her other self repeats the same actions, Jess eventually falls overboard and washes up on the shore. Trying to return home, she finds another version of herself abusing Tommy for spilled paint. Jess lures this alternate self outside and kills her with a hammer, reassuring Tommy that she meant no harm. She then disposes of her old body in her car's trunk and attempts to escape the loop with Tommy. However, Tommy gets anxious and distracts Jess from driving, causing her to hit a truck. The crash is so brutal that Tommy gets killed, and Jess watches the entire scene with horror. She steps out of the car, feeling devastated by the fact that she is responsible for her son's death. She feels hopeless as she sees her own dead body on the side of the road, lying next to Tommy. Then, a taxi driver shows up, offering to take Jess anywhere she wants to go. She asks the driver to take her to Triangle Harbor, and when they get there, the driver says that he will wait for her to come back. Jess doesn't understand it until she sees the new version of herself boarding Greg's boat. It is at this point that she realizes that she is doomed to repeat the same nightmare over and over again. Jess realizes she can't escape the endless loop, and as she joins the others on the boat, the cycle begins anew. And that's a wrap for today's recap. If you enjoyed diving into this wild adventure, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. Comment below with your thoughts or any theories you have about the movie. We love hearing from you. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time on Storey Recap.